When you know better, you hopefully do better. You can start leaning into these things. And even if it's incremental, slow leaning in, that's all right. You're better off than you were the day before. And that's where I want people to come from, not to be super like a health aficionados overnight, but just start to make these changes in their life.
You're listening to the Dare to Be Different podcast, a podcast for people who want to live an extraordinary life. On this week's episode, Joe sits down with Dr. Will Cole to talk about living a healthy life and treating your body right. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Dare to Be Different podcast. My name is Joe Altieri, and today I am here virtually with my good friend, Dr. Will Cole. How are you doing today, Will?
Hey, man. I am doing great. Thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
My pleasure. How's quarantine treating you? Everything, everybody's healthy, I assume, yeah?
It is, yeah. It is. For us, we've been... My day job, as you know, is talking to patients online, and we have a telehealth clinic, a virtual functional medicine practice. So it's weird. Like I don't know what it says about me that I basically my life is basically a quarantine pandemic life for the past 11 years, because I go to work, I'm consulting patients online, and then I go home, my kids are homeschooled. So then I'm like, oh, well, other than my traveling for conferences, pretty much I've been preparing for a pandemic for the past 11 years.
You're like, I can live in an 8x12 room and and work, survive.
Plus, I don't know if you know the Enneagram or not, but I'm a 5. So basically, I think 5s are, for the most part, galvanized and born for this. So they don't need all the, they don't need all the extrovert stuff to fulfill themselves. So I'm content. I'm at peace.
Good. Now you do have an office here in Pittsburgh, and you have staff. How are they coping with the changes? Everybody handling it pretty well?
It is, yeah. We have, again, I know a lot of people are very going through uncertain times with their job and personally and health-wise even. And we've been very fortunate at this point to all still be operating. We're all practicing social distancing. Some people are working from home sometimes. But that's the awesomeness of working virtually, is that it doesn't really impact the workflow and us getting care for patients. But we're spread out enough in the clinic. Yeah, it's basically business as usual here, getting people the care that they need.
Well, that's fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about what you do. I know that you have some really famous clients, and you're an expert in gut health. I guess I don't know how else to say it. Am I saying that correctly? Yeah,
it's functional medicine. So dealing with gut health is a part of that. But what I am is a functional medicine practitioner. So my heart and my passion is really getting to the root cause of why people are going through their health problems. So just to give people a little bit of a background from a academic side or my school training wise, my doctorate is from Southern California University of Health Sciences, and then my postdoctorate training and education is in functional medicine and clinical nutrition. So my main focus is, looking at these cases, looking at these people that are struggling with health problems, and then how do we find out why they feel the way that they do? So we deal a lot with autoimmune issues, and gut health is a major component for many people with autoimmunity. But I probably should back up a little bit. Functional medicine, if I had to break it down for people that don't know about it, the differences between what we do and what conventional medicine does. Number one, we interpret labs using a thinner reference range. So people that are listening will know, hey, when I get my lab, they'll have my number, and then they'll have this like reference range that I'm being compared to, this X to Y, interval of numbers. We get that reference range from a statistical bell curve average of people who go to that lab. So if you go to another lab, you probably will see that reference range will vary from lab to lab. It's not standardized. For the most part, none of them are standardized. So we have to ask the question, who are people that are predominantly going to labs? They're people with health problems.
Right.
So there's a lot of people that go and they're feeling fatigued, or they're feeling these unexplained symptoms, they're having these digestive problems, they're having these inflammatory issues, and they're running the labs that their doctor's running, and the labs come back, quote unquote, normal. And the person knows intuitively, like, heck, this isn't normal for me. And they're told, labs are fine. You're just getting older, or you're just depressed. Here's an antidepressant, or you just need to lose weight. All these sort of well-intentioned reasons. But what they're unintentionally being told is you're a lot like the other people with health problems that you're being compared to. And something that I talk a lot about is just because something's common doesn't necessarily mean it's normal. And comparing yourself to people with health problems isn't a good way for you to see how you can feel your best. So
Sure.
in functional medicine, we're looking at a thinner range within that larger reference range of where optimal, vibrant wellness resides, which is a tighter range. So the Institute for Functional Medicine, the Cleveland Clinic's Functional Medicine Center, that's the board of functional medicine doctors that have trained myself and my team. And really what we're immersing ourselves in is looking at these gray areas that explain why people feel the way that they do. And then we run more comprehensive labs. We're looking at things like underlying gut problems, like you said, or toxicity issues or hormonal imbalances. What are the root causes of why people are sick? And then we realize we're all created differently. And you could have 100 people with fatigue, for example. And for us, we would see that chronic fatigue as a check engine light. We know the check engine light's on, but why is it, what's going on underneath the hood, proverbially speaking? And is it a hormone deficiency or hormone imbalance? Is it a nutrient deficiency? Is it an underlying gut problem? Is it a toxicity? Is it a confluence of factors? Because someone being diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, just explaining how they're feeling is not explaining why you have the problem in the first place. Same with fibromyalgia or irritable bowel syndrome. These are just diagnoses of description. Like, okay, I know I have these things, that this is how I feel, but why? And that's my job to see, okay, what's driving that in the first place. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
Wow, that's in a nutshell. That's a lot. I mean,
my long-winded dissertation on functional medicine. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel really inadequate. I'm like, I sell screens. Like, so again, if I'm understanding this correctly, I mean, you essentially take the symptoms that a doctor would normally treat the symptoms, and you're trying to come up with the underlying cause. Is that so? I'm tired, right? And somebody might go, "Hey, you're depressed," for instance, and you're like, "Okay, that's fine. There's a symptom to treat, but let's find out why. Let's find out. Let's dig into your physiology to figure out why you're tired."
Yeah, because nobody is. You could say any health problem. But nobody is sick from a medication deficiency. Nobody's sick from a lack of antidepressant in their body, or whatever drug you're talking about. If it's high cholesterol, nobody's sick from a statin deficiency. We want to say, what's actually the core problem? And there's a reason for that. I mean, you can look upstream. You can go, what's the physiology saying? And this is not up for opinion or philosophy, some pontification from a doctor. You can measure these things on labs and actually go upstream and get data. The reason why it's not done in the conventional setting is not because the mainstream conventional doctor is like nefarious or not smart. I mean, they're brilliant physicians in conventional medicine. The reason is because the system is trained to diagnose a disease and match it with a medication. So that's what their training is. So they're doing their training perfectly. And there's a place for that. There are some people that are alive because of medications. We're not anti-medications. And most of my colleagues in functional medicine are also in conventional medicine too, and they're doing both because they see the need for both. And I see this need for both as well. But we would just ask the question, okay, what's the core problem? Because basically this is my litmus test. What is your most effective option that causes you the least amount of side effects? And for some people, medications fit that criteria. They need the medication, and it's really their best option for them. But there are many people where the medication doesn't fit that criteria. It's not the most effective option, can have a lot of potential side effects. And what's the end game? Is it just to stay on this medication forever? Or is there a more conservative, more sustainable solution here? And that's the question that I'm always asking for my patients.
So before we go any further, I do want to, because you said something earlier about the fact that you do a lot of your work online, working with clients and things like that. So you can work with anyone across the country, even through this crisis that we're going through. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I graduated from school, I started talking about functional medicine really early on, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. And I saw the impact that it had in my life, in my family's life, and just I was obsessed with the research and the applying this in people's lives. And so people in other states and countries would see the things I was talking about in 2008, 2009, and would want to reach out. So we would go on Skype and give them consultations at that point early on. And it just kind of snowballed over time. And it's funny, like when kind of just stay in your lane and you keep your head down and just stay focused at what God brings to you. Things, then you look back and you're like, whoa, like 10 years have passed by and you're still kind of doing it, but just looks different. It's evolved in a different way. So yeah, we didn't willfully think about it. We didn't plan it as some sort of thing, but there really wasn't an industry of telehealth or telemedicine. But now a lot of doctors, in the midst of what's happening right now in the country and around the world, doctors are having to learn telehealth and telemedicine just out of necessity because they are going to have to close their doors if they don't. Whereas nothing but the grace of God. I don't take any credit for it, but it's just we've kind of been doing this for a long time, which we're very good at the logistics and how to really make this work for people. And it's actually quite immersive. It's very, very helpful. It's responsive and immersive for the patient. They're getting really great quality care. And we drop ship labs to them wherever they're at. Like a lot of them are at-home kits, or if they have to go to a local draw center, obviously under normal circumstances, that's a completely normal thing. But now we even have, if people are afraid to go out of their home, we can coordinate at-home draw for nurses to come to their home. So it's really a nice, convenient way for people to get care. And my heart and my goal is to make this more accessible, more affordable to people that need it.
That's fantastic. And again, before we go any further, your website is
drwillcole.com. drwillcole.com. Yeah.
And you wrote a book too, which again, some famous some celebrities have talked about. So what is your book?
Yeah, so I've actually written two. Ketotarian is my first book. It came out at the end of 2018, and it's still in book world. Like we're still talking about that. It's not changed. So Ketotarian is a mostly plant-based ketogenic book. So half of the book's like science and health tips and the sort of understanding how to go keto a clean way. And we talk about cyclical keto and fasting and all these sort of ways to become metabolically flexible and become a fat burner and lower inflammation and all the benefits of ketosis. And then the other half is recipes and meal plans and pretty pictures and all that stuff. And then my second book is The Inflammation Spectrum, which came out recently, which is a deep dive into inflammation and why people should care, because inflammation is really the commonality between just about every health problem. When you talk about autoimmune conditions, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, those are all inflammatory, to even things like, depression, anxiety, fatigue, brain fog. There's a whole field of research that I talk about in the book, referred to as the cytokine model of cognitive function. And cytokines are pro-inflammatory cells. So it's looking at how inflammation is impacting people's brains, impacting mental health. Because in the West, we like to separate mental health from physical health. But the reality is mental health is physical health. Our brain is part of our body. And there's a reason why people are having these mental health issues. So it's really educating people about that. And then more importantly, what the heck should you do about it? Like there's so many ways through lifestyle changes, through functional medicine, through food and the choices that we make in our life to deal with these problems. So I love writing and I love talking about this stuff. So I'm really pumped about both of these books. But yeah,
and they can
talk about it.
Yeah, and they can buy them on your website. Can they get them on Amazon or anything like that?
Amazon's probably the place to go. We have the links at drwillcole.com to Amazon, but Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Indie Books. Yeah, once people are not quarantined, they can go to Barnes and Noble and get them. Right. So that's where they go.
Man, that's so impressive. Writing a book is one of my goals. So yeah. I might talk to you in the future about that process. I have a lot of ideas of what I want it to look like, but to see somebody that actually does, the things that I aspire to do is just it's inspirational to me. So I'm really just excited to just be talking to you and so let's talk about some things, some real world today things of. Look, we're in a crazy time with all the coronavirus things. People are stuck at home. They're stressed. And most of the time, I've seen tons of memes online and everything. They're not making good choices as far as their diet and their physical health and mental health through this. Do you have some tips and tricks that we can share with the listeners?
Certainly. Well, I think all of this should be predicated on, as with anything, is grace and lightness. Because I'm going to go over some things and talk about some stuff, and then people are going to stress about not doing all the things. So I don't want them to feel inadequate or, oh my gosh, I'm a failure. What am I doing with my life? Like, look, lean into this stuff, because all of this is meaningless if you don't come to it with a positive mental space and come to it with a sense of, instead of dread and shame and all the things I'm not doing, I'm not adding up, and I'm stressing through these acts of wellness. That's no good. You can't stress and shame your way into wellness. So it has to be coming from a place of, look, what a blessing it is for me to go and lean into these things. How can I love my body enough? How can I take and be a good steward of my body enough to lean into these things? That has to be the framework. That has to be the ethos of why we're doing what we're doing. So the why is just as important as the what, if not more important than the what.
That's interesting because I go through that. I have because I have a kind of a poor relationship with food and sweets and things like that. I messed up a little bit today, so I might as well just eat every piece of chocolate in the house because I just, I beat myself up over it. I'm like, well, I might as well feel really bad now since I feel a little bit bad. So that's really interesting, the mental part of this, how important that is.
That's the difference. That's the paradigm shift between sustainable wellness and another fad diet or something that you've tried that you've added to your pile of things that have failed in the past. Because if it's coming from a place of grace and lightness, it doesn't matter if it's going to come and go, but the foundation is there and you're kind of rooted in that knowingness of who you are. The analogy that I use in the book, in the inflammation spectrum, is that if we see ourselves as like a Tesla versus like an old beat up car, how would we treat ourselves? And I think a lot of times people don't value who they are. They're not seeing themselves as that. And that to me propels people to more, instead of this sort of like shame-based approach to wellness, they're coming really from a place of self-worth and using self-care as a form of self-respect. And that's where I try to teach my patients where to come from. And I talk about it in the books too. But I mean, if talking about self-care or wellness during this time of quarantine, and really all of this applies to after that. So even if people listen to this afterwards, all of this remains. This is stuff I've talked about for the past 11 years. It's just more of a reason to do when you're in the midst of crisis or uncertainty or things aren't going so well.
Or just trapped at home with teenagers or toddlers or whatever the case, where the stress level rises dramatically.
And they're just like circling their room trying to, they're like a have you seen, I'm going to go off at a tangent here. Have you seen Tiger King yet?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Creep. It's like watching a train wreck. You like have to watch the entire thing. It's just horrible, but yet.
There's a couple times I walked away. I'm like, I'm not watching this. And then you hear something, you're like, I got to go back in. What just happened? So it is. It's just exactly like a train wreck. Yes. Exactly.
So I feel like many people are like those tigers in those cages that right now in quarantine, just pacing with their homes and not nowhere to go. It starts with food. Every food we eat is either feeding inflammation or fighting it. You have to start every meal, every next meal, every snack as another opportunity to do one or the other. It's either going to bring stress hormones up or calm stress hormones down. There's no Switzerland meal. There's no like benign, I'm doing nothing for you food. It's instructing your biochemistry in some way. Some in big ways, some in negligible ways, but it's doing something. So for people that want like recipes and meal plans and stuff, there's a lot of free content at drwillcole.com. There's books and the meal plans and all that stuff. But for the sake of just educating people today about this.
Just some general type of things.
Yeah, sure. So I would say, let's look at the things we should be focusing on. I think that's always better to focus on all the things you should have and should focus on instead of all the things you can't have. Because the reality is you can have anything that you want. It shouldn't be coming from this place of I can't have that. It's like, no, I actually like feeling better more than I miss that food. that should be the focus.
That's good.
And I would say focusing on healthy fats is a good place to start with. So things like avocados and olives and extra virgin olive oil and avocado oil, wild caught fish, grass-fed beef, nuts and seeds. And I typically recommend to soak nuts and seeds to make them more digestible. And maybe that's a little bit weirder for some people, but basically it just makes them to break down, digest easier. And you just soak them in water. You can get a dehydrator or just have them raw. I mean, it's fine. But people that have sensitive digestive systems should be soaking the nuts and seeds. And those are healthy fats: coconut cream, coconut milk. That's sort of the foundation that I talk about in ketotarian, this sort of mostly plant-based, clean keto approach. I'm not saying everybody has to be in ketosis, but these are healthy fats, whether you're in ketosis or not, to focus on. And then lots of vegetables. I would have them cooked predominantly because it makes it easier to digest. Okay. So lots of vegetables, low fructose fruits like berries and citrus fruits. So that's sort of the foundation of the meals that you should be having: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I would say the foods that you want to consider avoiding or at least reducing are going to be things that drive inflammation levels up. That's going to be grains, a lot of grains. So gluten-containing grains like wheat and rye and oat and barley and spelt, but also gluten-free grains should be probably considered to be eliminated or reduced. That's things like rice and quinoa and corn. Some people tolerate those in small amounts. I wouldn't have them as the foundation of your meal.
Interesting.
And then the next one would be dairy, conventional dairy specifically. I have a conversation in the book about the different types of dairy and the science around it, all of it. I think that like in biblical times, the predominant protein casein, the dairy protein was beta A2 casein. But because we've gone as humans and messed things up, we've crossbred cows, and it's this new casein called beta A1 casein. So it's this mismatch between genetics and epigenetics that's the problem. So I think you can get better forms of dairy, but regardless, I think that people should be looking at conventional dairy, of limiting it or avoiding that. And then high industrial seed oils like canola oil and vegetable oil, that's pro-inflammatory. And added sugar. People know that, but they should read labels because sugar has a lot of euphemisms, right? There's a lot of pretty names that doesn't sound like sugar, but sugar. So they should educate themselves on the labels of the foods that they're buying. So limit those, focus on the things I just said. That's a good start there.
Yeah. Some of the, of course, high fructose corn syrup, has, come out as one of the no-nos, at least if you're trying to limit your sugar. There's some other names that sugar goes by.
Yeah. Anything with the suffix "ose," OSE, is definitely a good way to look at that, because there's a lot of different variations of sugar that you'll see with the suffix "ose" in their name. Some more natural ones that sound nice, but I would say you want to consider limiting it, is things like agave nectar, evaporated cane juice. Those are two that are very common, and even the healthier versions of things that it's still sugar. It may be slightly better, but honestly, I think the high fructose in things like agave nectar can be really hard on the liver. And just because it comes from agave, the processing and the refinement, the concentration of it, the high amounts of it in some of these more natural foods, we still should be looking at the sugar content and reading that in the label, what type of sugar they're using, and then read the carbohydrates and the sugar on the nutrition label.
So me going to Starbucks and using the brown sugar instead of the white sugar really doesn't help out too much, is what you're saying.
Yeah, not much. I mean, I guess in some way there's probably a slightly lower glycemic index, slightly probably less refined. They probably use less chemicals on it, which certainly has its merit. I mean, there's some value to that, but it's still from a insulin standpoint, the stimulation it's having on insulin and raising people's blood sugar, impacting their microbiome, their gut bacteria. All of that stuff's going to be pretty much the same. So I think the grams of carbohydrates and then looking at the sugar content is really important for people to at least be aware of and be conscious of.
So again, as some of us are dealing with mental health of being shut in, our diets will definitely play an impact on that. So I assume that the sugars and some of the other things that you had talked about that we should be limiting actually affect our mental health through this as well. Raise stress levels, raise, some of the hormones that we don't necessarily want raised during this time. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So food is a influencer of our biochemistry. It's instructing our biochemistry. So when I said earlier how when you're looking at the research around things like anxiety and anxious thoughts, even and then depression and fatigue, these are all inflammatory in nature. So research, there's a couple different ways that food can influence those mental health problems or just stress as a whole. Let's just say stress, even if you're not diagnosed with one of these issues. It's a few different ways. One is that foods that bring inflammation levels up will just bring up systemic inflammation, which is associated with these health problems. Part of that ripple effect, that sort of cascade of instruction that's going on when you have your food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks, it's impacting your hormones. So things that bring up inflammation, your body is very, very intelligently designed. So the cortisol level wants to come up because cortisol is a stress hormone, but it's not inherently bad. I mean, God created cortisol. You want balanced cortisol levels. And in a way, when the body's under stress, you want cortisol to come up. It's an immunosuppressant, a natural endogenous immunosuppressant. So it actually brings inflammation levels down. So your body's trying to balance what you're giving it. So if you're giving your body things that are inflammatory, the body says, whoa, like I'm a little bit stressed. And maybe you're already stressed from external things, right? You're already stressed. And then you're giving your body things that further stress it. Body bring cortisol up and then up even more to try to mitigate those inflammatory problems and balance blood sugar, which can be toxic when it's really high. The body's trying to regulate that. And then that causes a ripple effect because then the person is in the sympathetic fight or flight state. It's impacting their gut microbiome as well because what we eat is going and influencing our gut microbiome, which is so much exciting research around that. I mean, your gut, Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, knew thousands of years ago in Greece. He said all disease begins in the gut. I don't know how he knew it, but that's why he's the father of medicine, and I'm not. But now research is estimating over 90% of health problems that we face today, at least to some degree, begin in the gut. I mean, you're talking about the brain connection there. I mean, your gut and brain, all of our gut and brain, they're formed from the same fetal tissue. So when babies are growing in their mom's womb, the gut and brain are formed from the same fetal tissue, and they're inextricably linked for the rest of all of our lives through what's known in the research as the gut-brain axis. 95% of people's serotonin, their happy neurotransmitter that makes them not stressed and not depressed, 95% of that is made in the gut and stored in the gut. And the gut is actually referred to as the second brain in the research. And if you think about it, the intestines even kind of resemble the brain. And the foods we eat impact our second brain and then impact our first brain. So it's really important for people to realize that every meal is another opportunity to do one or the other. And again, stressing about not eating healthy isn't good. Like stressing about healthy foods isn't good for your health either. So I don't want people to be stressed out about this. This is about, okay, look, when you know better, you hopefully do better. You can start leaning into these things. And even if it's incremental, slow leaning in, that's all right. You're better off than you were the day before. And that's where I want people to come from, not to be super like health aficionados overnight, but just start to make these changes in their life.
Yeah, one of the things that my wife and I talked about, when the New Year started was, we have our words of the year, and one of mine is being vulnerable. And I actually might reach out to you and get some advice and actually start following it and chronicle it through this time because
that'd be awesome.
I think that people a lot of times, they don't understand that. I'm sure even your clients and things like that, they struggle with it just like everyone else does. You know what I mean? Diet is tough. I mean, this is especially when we're bombarded with poor choices that are out there. You know, where it's just so easy to go through a drive-through somewhere. And it's so easy to, have temporary joy in a bag of M&Ms versus a long-term going, wow, that bag of M&Ms, I felt good for 3 minutes as I was eating it, but what did that do for me for the rest of the day or whatever the case may be?
Totally. You're absolutely right. I think and these foods are designed to be addictive and we're being marketed to left and right. It's very immersed in our culture where we're set up to fail. I mean, you have to really be growing in that awareness that this is all designed to be mass produced and massively consumed. So it's not easy. People are really the food supply and the food industry and the amount of the access that the junk food that people have is really accessible. It's very accessible. It's very ubiquitous in our culture. I heard it said once, and it's kind of funny, but sometimes I think it's true. It said it's easier to change someone's religion than the foods they eat. And sometimes I think that maybe there's some truth to that people can get very triggered and get very defensive, and it's very rooted in their being when you're talking about these things.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, hey, Will, I really appreciate your time, and I'd love to do this again. And like I said, if if you don't mind, like I said, I wouldn't mind reaching out and actually documenting some of my my journey through trying to eat better and maybe taking some of your advice, because there's so much bad advice out there. I know that you're a trustworthy person, and I know some of the people that have gone through your program and have had tremendous results. So,
hey, my honor. It'd be on my honor to be a part of it, a part of your journey. So anytime, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks again for coming on. Thank you for for your advice to all the listeners. The Dare to Be Different podcast is all about living an extraordinary life, and one of our key points is being healthy, and that of course is physical health, mental health, and all of those things, as you had said, are intertwined.
Interwoven, yeah.
So I really appreciate your time, and one more time, can you throw out your website so that if people want some more information, they can find you?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. This is great. Everything's at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com. You can get links to the book. We offer a free webcam or phone health evaluation if people want a functional medicine perspective on their case.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you guys, everyone, for listening. I hope that you got something great out of this. The thing that I got out of this was, do your best, reach out, get some good information, but don't beat yourself up over it. Don't make the whole situation worse because you may trip up or fail in some way. Tomorrow's always a new day, right? So, well, thank you guys. Thank you again, Will. Thanks to all the listeners. If you know somebody that might be helped by this, please share it. Otherwise, we will catch up with you next time. Have a good one.